Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to all who are attending on WebEx or are following the Facebook Live. This is the fourth and the last seminar of the series EU-Next Talks, organized by Region Europe, the international program of the University of Turin on Europe and its role in the world. So our purpose today is to discuss the current trends in the EU-MENA relations and how to rethink them, of course, taking stock of the successes and failures of more than 25 years of Euro-Mediterranean partnership and of European policies towards the region. So the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership, as you know, was launched in 1995 as a forward-thinking, transformative foreign policy, which would strengthen ties between Europe and the Mediterranean Arab states. But since that time, translating the initial ambitions into positive, successful policy has proved quite problematic. So the Arab Uprisings that started in early 2011 confronted the EU with the limitation of its long-standing structural foreign policy towards the Mediterranean region and the Middle East, as well with these limitations where the sudden crisis and violent conflicts arise. So as a consequence, a growing reflection on the relaunch of the strategic partnership between the EU and its Southern Neighbourhood partners is underway, both in the academia and the EU circles and institutions. In this context, in February 2021, the European Commission and the High Representative adopted a joint communication proposing a new agenda for the Mediterranean. So in order to discuss this topic and the future of these relations, we have invited two colleagues, Raffaella A. Sarto and Simone Tholens, who are contributing to the academic debate with a very important edited book titled Resisting Europe, Practices of Contestation in the Mediterranean Middle East, just published by the University of Michigan Press. This book conceptualizes the foreign policies of Europe towards the states in its southern neighborhood as semi-imperial attempts to turn these states into Europe's southern buffer zone, and shows at the same time how these states reject, resist, or challenge European policies and preferences. So Raffaella A. Sarto is professor of Middle East Studies at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies and has published extensively on this topic. I would just like to mention another authored book just published by Oxford University Press titled Borderlands, Europe and the Mediterranean Middle East. Simone Tholens is Professor of International Relations at the Cardiff University, where she serves as co-director of the Center for Conflict, Security and Societies. She's also visiting fellow at the European University Institute Robert Schuman Center. But I'm very pleased and honored also to introduce to you the third speaker of the seminar, Ambassador Fernando Gentilini, and thank you very much for joining us. Ambassador Gentilini, since 2018, is Managing Director for Middle East and North Africa at the European External Action Service. And previously, he held numerous important positions, such as Deputy Diplomatic Advisor to the Italian Prime Minister, Senior Advisor on the Western Balkans at the European External Action Service, and EU Special Representative in Kosovo, just to name a few. Then he's also a prolific author, because I want just to mention his latest book, published in 2020, which is titled Tre volte a Gerusalemme. The translation is 3 times in Jerusalem, in which he recounts Jerusalem and his experience there, the years he spent there. So Ambassador Gentilini, okay, he's here with us. And before starting, please let me thank colleague and friend Rosita Di Peri for co-organizing and hosting this. We are ready, so I shall give the word to Raffaella del Sarto and Simone Tholens, who can present you, so you can present your particular approach to the analysis of EU-MENA relations and reflect on the practices of contestation, of resistance in the Mediterranean Middle East, and on the current trends in EU-MENA relations. Then it will be Ambassador Gentilini's turn. Of course, dear students, your comments and reflections, questions are more than welcome. You can use the chat as usual, or you can take the mic to put your questions and comments on the table. Okay, so thank you very much. That's all from my side, and I give the word to Raffaella and Simone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will take over the word here. Yes. Thank you so much, Professors Finizio and Di Peri, for inviting us to this very interesting talk with an interesting composition of speakers. Well, Raffaella and me, we speak together quite frequently, but with the added value of Professor and Ambassador Gentilini, rather, this I'm sure will be a very interesting conversation for all of us. So I will kind of start this off by introducing this edited book that we have basically just published. This is the way it looks. Now, the thing is that this is really a beginning of a conversation, and we found, even if we started working on this book quite some years ago, we really found that it comes at quite a timely moment. And the fact that we're talking about this book to a variety of audiences really testifies to the fact that there's something in the making. Now, we are in a changing geopolitical landscapes internationally, and obviously this also impacts on the kind of Europe-Middle East relationship and really this political realm across the Mediterranean. So I just going to start by basically laying out how we have thought about resistance and contestation practices. Then Raffaella will rather detail some of the implications and the findings from the book, which I think will then, you know, pave nicely the way for the ambassador in the end. So, so the book really deals with how actors in the Mediterranean Middle East, and we do exclude the Gulf states, which we find having quite different dynamics, how these actors in the Mediterranean Middle East engage with, how they negotiate, and how they contest European actors, and in particular the European Union and its neighborhood approach to the region. So the book itself is an outcome of the ERC-funded Borderlands Project, which was ran from 2011 to 2016, and which was directed by Raffaella del Sarto and hosted at the Robert Schuman Center here at the European University Institute. And the starting point of the book, as I mentioned, and of the Borderlands Project itself, was a dissatisfaction with the normative power Europe debates and its kind of offshoot, the European external governance literature, which was quite fashionable, one can say, sort of 5 to 10 years ago. And is still quite a strong, sort of strongly dominating at least part of the Euro-Mediterranean analysis and literature. So this, however, seemed to us to not only, let's say, ignore some of the hegemonic undertones of treating the MENA region as the EU's southern neighbourhood, which may be reminiscent of a civilizing mission, as Yanis Devaktis' chapter in our book details, but perhaps above all also epistemologically flawed. So the European external governance literature is quite concerned with measuring the success of rule promotion, primarily by formal adoption of EU norms. And we argue that this really only takes us so far in terms of understanding what is really going on in this political interaction area. So taking Europeanization then as a starting point and noting the puzzling fact that EU frameworks and rules are promoted in a region outside the scope of any EU membership prospects, yet replete with many of the same instruments, framework agreements, action plans as those that were designed for the Eastern enlargement process. The book instead, in the book we try to bring out a more nuanced and let's say grounded perspective on what happens between compliance and rejection. And we kind of refute a unilateral approach, and instead we develop an exploration of the way that MENA states developed a host of contestation practices to deal with and indeed resist European norm power. And we kind of, anyone who's working on this in this field, anyone who's, put their hands on this will know that there's so much happening. And, we're following scripts and following or measuring and tracing the formal norm adoption really is a very partial kind of approach. But we probably need some, new analytical frames in order to better explore this. So in the book, we draw on a Borderlands perspective, where the disaggregation of functional borders as a result of European actors' insistence, to some extent, at least until quite recently, rule promotion approach. This entails treating it as an empire of sorts, perhaps as a semi-imperial set of practices connecting the core to a periphery. And this kind of perspective allows for treating the Euro-Mediterranean area as rather as a shared site of political interaction, and therefore also develop a framework of a contestation which is not just just mere rejection, but as practices that engage with external rules and norms in also potentially productive ways. And this interactive and interrelational view of norms brings us to develop a practice framework for this book. And this means that we locate contestation in practices. So those actual and everyday doings and sayings that structure world politics and in international relations, there is a practice turn, and we kind of take inspiration from this. It may bring us beyond sort of some of the macro narratives that often define formal representation of Euro-Mediterranean relations, and to rather what is really going on and how the norms and the narratives come to life and kind of how they are contested through micro practices. So this is essentially, even if we don't use this vocabulary in the book, this is essentially a decolonizing move and seeking to some extent provincialize Europe and European discourse, and to improve our analytical and theoretical building blocks. So it requires us to ask some new sets of questions and explore issues of power and resistance in new ways. And so to better understand how MENA states in particular then contest European norms and rules, In the book, we propose some ideal types of contestation practices. And above all, we make a distinction, and of course, these are ideal types, so there will be overlaps, and we can certainly discuss their utility, but we thought it would be useful to start with a distinction between thin and thick forms of contestation practices, and we build here on the work by Rebecca Nissen and Vincent Poliot from 2014. And here we see thin contestation as essentially an acceptance of the criteria for competence, but where the contest will be around their relative position within a particular setting. So for the purpose of the empirical area that we study, this will be the case where it is accepted that the EU sets the rules in a certain issue area, but the shape of those rules will be the source of contestation. On the other hand, we identify thick forms of contestation, and those will question the very definition of competence and the legitimacy of the actor claiming that competence. And for our purpose, this will be the case where European rules and norms are not only resisted, but actually new forms of accepted behavior is sought imposed on the EU itself. And it is a question mark that we have noted perhaps in the work with the book and the aftermath, whether we are moving towards higher frequency of thick contestation, even if in our book we actually have perhaps only one example of this. And Raffaella will talk about this in her presentation. So in the book, we also operate with subtler forms of overt or explicit versus hidden forms of contestation. And above all then, the result, I think, is that we have a framework to start to unpack the various forms of contestation taking place as European rules meet MENA realities. And also to unbound some of the material asymmetry that is assumed to structure these interregional relations in the Euro-Mediterranean area. So in the book, we kind of seek to address at least three questions. How is contestation manifested? Why and when does it take place? And what are the broader implications for understanding power in the Euro-Mediterranean relationship when adopting this approach? So Raffaella will hopefully, she disappeared off the map here, but she will hopefully address, she will exactly address how some of the findings from the book and some of the implications of asking these questions. So with that, we're back over to Raffaella, hopefully.
Raffaella, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, but my camera just stopped working, and it just doesn't want to start again. It says to me that, so you will have to listen to me without seeing me, I suppose. If that is okay. I don't know how to fix that at the moment. So yeah, so of course, thank you very much for having me and for inviting me. So just to follow up on what Simone was saying, we basically, the book was basically an attempt to shift the attention to the strategies and the responses of MENA states away from the Eurocentric perspective that has characterized most of the European studies literature so far. And so what are the main findings of the book? So first of all, a few conclusions on contestation in Europe-Middle East relations. First point is that resistance in the peripheries, we're talking about core periphery, right? So resistance in the peripheries is both expected and also accepted. And this is because the expansion of the European order proceeds through conditionality. So the European Union is expanding its order, ties it to conditions, and this is part of Europe-MENA relations. It's a practice. Contestation is a practice in which both sides participate. We have a great chapter in the book by Magali Gravier, which presents a historical perspective on empires and the peripheries. And she basically shows that that is something that has always happened. So there is a sort of accommodation going on. That's the way cores deal with their peripheries. Second point is that contestation in Euro-Mediterranean relations occur both at the macro level and at the micro level. So, for example, there is contestation over the legitimacy of neoliberal economic policies. There is also plenty of resistance by member states to European policies on migration. This may not be particularly surprising. But there's also opposition to rather technical issues, such as regulations in the banking and the telecommunications sectors. Third point, the book shows that member states exert their agency in many ways. So our book shows that there is thick contestation, also, although thick contestation, as Simona was saying, is rather rare in Europe-MENA relations. We only had, in our book, we only had one case of a MENA country contesting the competence of Europe to set the rules. And that was the case of Turkey in the realm of border controls. It was the chapter that Asli Okyay wrote. And conversely, fourth point, there are many ways of circumventing, localizing, or otherwise contesting European rules. That is different forms of thin contestation, which may be hidden or overt. So we have a chapter on Morocco contesting European telecommunications regulations. We have a chapter, that's the chapter on telecommunications is by Véronique Wavre and Tina Freiburg. We have a chapter by Roberto Rocco, which is on the European banking regulations in the case of Egypt before the Arab uprisings. And that is a case, for example, where the Egyptian authorities talked the talk, but then modified the rules according to the interests of the Egyptian business elites and their political cronies. We have a chapter on Morocco and Tunisia contesting European migration policies, which was co-written by Mohamed Limam and myself. And again, it shows that thin and hidden contestation was the rule before the Arab uprisings, which in part also resulted in the localization of some of the European rules, such as the criminalization of migration in these countries. And contestation has become much more vocal and variegated after the uprisings, and that has also to do with the fact that Europe's pressure on these states increased as regards migration control. We have another chapter by Tamiras Fahouri, which is on Lebanon and the contestation of European ideas of how to deal with refugees after the Arab uprisings. So fifth point, the volume confirms that contestation is far from being a unidirectional process. Because what we have seen is that in some cases, countries that traditionally acted as norm receivers, let's say, they may become norm setters. That was the case of Turkey with regard to border control once the civil war in Syria started. What can we say about power and order in Europe-Middle East relations? The fact that MENA states seem to favor thin contestation seems to support the assumption that material power and material power asymmetries matter. But we also see that states do engage in overt and sometimes even thick contestation on issues in which they have a leverage over Europe. And that has become particularly the case for migration and border controls. So in fact, power relations between Europe and the Mediterranean Middle East are much more complex than most existing research acknowledges. And that also compels us in a way to consider the interplay of material power with a different kind of power. We have termed it practice power, but of course there is a whole discussion about what power is, how we can conceptualize there's not only a whole debate, there are whole libraries written on that topic, right? And I think that this fact, when we were thinking about power relations, this is also a very important aspect for the world of policy. We can even think about what is currently happening in Israel and the Gaza Strip for thinking about power relations. Again, power relations, the European Union vis-a-vis Israel and the Palestinians. Again, asymmetrical power relations do not always seem to be the main factor, right? And finally, where do we go from here? Now, in a way, there is a sort of a hypocrisy. We can even call it an institutionalized hypocrisy in Europe's attempts to export its order. And that is particularly the case because Europe, in a way, accepts it that this order is implemented in MENA states in a distorted way. So it means that a diluted form of European norms arrive, and that diluted form of European norms tends to support crony capitalism and procedural democracy at best. And here we have a very interesting chapter by Raymond Hinnebusch. So what we need, in my view, in our view, if I may speak also in the name of Simone and our authors perhaps, is that we need some serious studies that focus on the outcome of European policies and not only on discourse and intentions. And I have tried to do that in my Borderlands book, which has not yet been published, which is forthcoming in a few months with Oxford University Press. So really also consider what is the impact of European policies on the region. And we also need more studies that look more closely at the agency of MENA states and possibly the impact that their actions have on Europe, because there are some, right? So the question that we're left with, in a way, is the European project sustainable once an empowered MENA region is viewed in purely security terms by the Europeans? Because this is what is currently happening. No? The security perspective has become much stronger in the aftermath of the Arab uprisings. It is the concern with stability. It is the concern with migration, which is turned into a security issue. Of course, also coupled to the discovery of large natural gas fields in the Eastern Mediterranean. So Simone mentioned that in the introduction, geopolitics are back in the case they ever left, right? And we can obviously say that it was always about the stability of the periphery from Europe's perspective, but perhaps now it's clearer than ever. But I think that what is very important to keep in mind is that the regional order in the Middle East after the uprisings is in the middle of a process of considerable change. We don't really know where it's going, but something is changing, right? We have other players that are active in, let's call it, Europe's hinterland from a Eurocentric perspective, right? And that includes Russia, Turkey, the Gulf states, here particularly Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, but also China. And that means that MENA states have gained a greater space of maneuver and partly also leverage over Europe. So there are many more questions actually that can be raised in this context, and I'm sure that we will discuss some of these issues also with Ambassador Gentilini. And so in a way, Simone mentioned that as well, our book must be seen as the beginning, right, rather than the end. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Simone and Raffaella. And now it's Ambassador Gentilini's turn, who can, present your point of view and the EU's point of view on the subject and how the EU also is addressing these dynamics of resistance and is trying to rethink human relations and relaunch the partnership. Okay, thank you very much. Please, Ambassador Gentilini, you have the floor.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. Can I ask a question to start with? Who is the audience here? Because I understand we have students, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I'm sure the students have already, you know, some background on Europe and on the Middle East and
Yes, they have. They have.
Yes, good, very good. No, many thanks. Thanks for the invitation. I was listening with a lot of interest the presentation. I'm thinking where to start, because of course I will have a lot of things to say. First, couple of points. I'm an official of the European Union. I don't have the luxury of working for a think tank, or of working for a university, or I work for an institution. Actually, maybe one useful thing I can try to do is to try to explain a bit in detail, a bit in concrete, what the EU does. Because otherwise, I'm afraid that if we go too much into academic, is not clear what the EU does and what the EU does not. So I will try to make a few examples on what it means to be an official in the European Union and to work in the MENA region. The other thing I want to say, I mean, I heard lots of words, and I apologize because I haven't had the chance to read the book, Semi-imperial buffer zone, decolonization, institutional hypocrisy. As I said, I'm also, you know, I'm a free person. I say what I think, but basic point here is that the EU is not a state. The EU is not an empire. Very difficult for the EU, even if you wanted to act as a state, to act as an empire, as a colonized power, because simply it is not. It's a completely different thing. The other thing, and then I will go into a few details, is that of course we all know the context, and I think students know the context very well. What we are going through in the world, I mean, what the EU is going through internally. I'm saying this because I'm a foreign policy person. I've been doing foreign policy for the last 30 years, so I have a certain inclination to look at things from a foreign policy perspective. But clearly, the EU has been conceived to do different things, and it's not by chance that the EU is. I'm saying this because of the students, actually, but it's not a chance that the EU has a certain backtrack in terms of internal market, in terms of internal policies, in the way it has transformed the national policy into the internal policy on the continent. And this is one thing. Foreign policy is a different thing. I work for this diplomatic European service, which is a 10-old creature. We are celebrating this year. So I'm saying this because EU, let's say, is an adult when it comes to certain policies, internal policies. It's a young, very young actor when it comes to foreign policy. That's why, you know, using the terms I was referring before, I don't think it's very appropriate when it comes to the EU. But I respect everybody, and I think all this is very interesting. Now, what does it mean for the EU to work in the MENA region? What are examples of the things the EU does in the MENA region? Given the situation we are today, I like to start by saying that, for instance, the EU provides support, very concrete supports, in order for schools and hospitals to function in Gaza. This, I think, it's something we have been doing for the decades, previous decades, and will continue to do. Support to the Palestinian Authority to build their own state. I think the EU provides macroeconomic support to countries who are desperately in need of macroeconomic support when they need to go through certain transition. I have Tunisia in mind. I think if we look at the recent, the current actually crisis, the pandemic, I think what the EU does is trying to use resources in all the region to address social and health issues, which are a direct consequence of the pandemic. So I have a kind of very logic, very practical and concrete things, a concrete way of looking at what we do, which is the reason why I come to office every day. I go back to the introduction, Professor. You were saying in a few words what the background here for the EU-MENA cooperation, so I'm not going into that. But I just want to stress that in this new communication that was issued, you referred to, what are some of the building blocks of this communication? First, and I think this is very important, we don't do anything that we are not asked for. This is a very clear principle in the way this contractual relation is built. If I look at what we heard from our partner in the region in Barcelona a few months ago, I mean, not the 25 years old Barcelona, but the meeting in which this communication was first discussed with our partners. The countries in the region want the EU to take an approach which is as much inclusive as possible. And they want to closely work with the EU on a number of areas. Climate change, digitalization, connectivity are the first things which comes to my mind, because these are flash words in the new communication. They want an investment plan. They want the EU to help them to attract investment. They want us to support job creation, especially youth, more active. They want us to be more active on conflict resolution. The region, I think you all, Libya, Syria, I mentioned Middle East peace process earlier on. Libya now, I think we are in a much better place than we were for the last couple of years, but still. First point of this communication, we work with our partners. We do not impose, also because, I mean, even if you want to impose, you will fail. No one can impose anything. I think it's pretty clear from the past experience, not just in the region, but a bit everywhere. So this new framework set some of the areas where we and our partners would like to focus in the coming year. You might know that this year is the first financial year of the new cycle. So this is the year where the European Union program is money for the next 7 years. Human development, I think, is going to be first, together with governance, rule of law, peace and security, as I said, migration and mobility, green transition, climate, energy, environment. I think these are the areas where we want to do more and to act with our partners. Can we be proud? Can we be satisfied with what has happened in the past years when it comes to EU and MENA region cooperation? Of course, we have to do more. Of course, what we have been trying is not enough. Of course, we cannot be complacent with ourselves. This, I think, it's very clear. But the question here is to think about concrete things that you can do and move on. I mentioned this investment plan because this is going to be also a key component in this new approach, which comes out from the joint communication. This means essentially shifting the relationship in this area. With grants, the relation is donor-recipient. With an investment plan, the relation is among partners. So I think these are some of the things that are part of this approach, are part of this communication. And the next step is that we discuss this with our regional partners. The other important thing is that we don't have a matrix which goes everywhere. This was maybe the case some years ago. That's not the case any longer. I think it's very clear that each country here has to be seen on its own, because every country has its own specificity. Each country has its own way they want to deal with the European Union. So we will negotiate the future with each of the country. Our, let's say, basic contractual piece of paper is called partnership priority, which means exactly, you know, to define what is that we are going to do together. Also to our benefit, because obviously we have a lot to benefit from the relationship with these countries. As I said, there will be a lot of things to say in more specific also on certain areas, but maybe I'm interested if students, if people have questions, I would be happy to try to answer to those questions, because then, I mean, to see also what everybody has in mind. So I think I would stop it here for now. But many thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador Gentilini. Maybe it would be useful, Simone and Raffaella, if you could clarify a bit what you mean with the concept of empire when applied to the European Union. Of course, this is a debate. Of course, so there are many authors discussing this issue and this concept of debate of empire applied to the European Union. Let's talk about you know, Zielonka or Europe as a post-colonial power, Calypso Nicolaidis, and many others. Yes, so maybe it would be useful if you could go a little bit in depth in this. And then I don't know whether Rosita wants to jump in a bit. Okay, please.
Maybe Raffaella and Simone, if you can explain a little bit more this concept, I think it will be useful, because maybe for non-academics and also in the frame of this huge debate that has been generated among scholars, I think it's useful to be more specific also, in order I think to answer to the suggestions that Ambassador Gentilini put on the table, because I think that, but I don't want to monopolize. And first of all, thank you all for your participation and for the speeches that I found extremely interesting. I don't want to monopolize, but I think that one of the reasons of this meeting was to put together practitioners, if you want, and scholars and academics. And I believe there is a gap between the academic production and how this academic production affects practitioner and in general the policy making process. And I think the idea to put all of you together on the same table is to discuss the approaches and also the controversial point that affected the Euro-Mediterranean relations, that are many, in my view. Is not just what the European Union do or not do, because of course European Union is doing and do a lot over the time, but maybe how a European Union manage and affect the MENA region somehow. So I think it's important to discuss this kind of issue. So I will leave you the floor. Maybe after I will ask some questions, but please, if you want to better conceptualize the idea as European Union as an empire, that Raffaella, you were one of the main scholar and promoter of this debate. In my view, maybe you started the debate about how to reconceive European Union according to this idea of empire that of course have many problems, but also possibilities, in my view. So I will give you the floor, Simone and Raffaella.
Yes, I think I go. Thank you very much. Now, I can imagine that for Ambassador Gentilini and others working for the External Action Service, or generally speaking for the European Union, hearing that the European Union or Europe could be conceptualized as a sort of an empire doesn't sound very, perhaps not very flattering, and could undermine the purpose of the work, obviously. Now, when we talk about, or when we talk about Europe as a sort of an empire, the idea is not that Europe is invading anyone with the military, obviously, right? It is a conceptualization that puts an emphasis on the way in which the European Union relates to its immediate peripheries, immediate neighborhoods, if you wish. And it's not about invading and imposing an order by force. It is about expanding its rules and its disaggregated borders to the peripheries by agreement of the elites in those countries, right? Why empire? Empire because you can think about the European Union being composed itself of a core and different peripheries, of having many overlapping functional regimes. We're thinking about the Eurozone, the Schengen area, and so on and so on. So there are different types of functional zones or areas within the European Union. And there has been, at least since the last 25 years, with the Barcelona Declaration, but even arguably even before that, certainly it picked up with the neighborhood policy, the attempts to export at least part of the European order to the peripheries. Again, as I said, by agreement. This order includes a specific development model. It includes including specific MENA countries in EU programs and projects and so on, which usually go according to European rules, right? It's not according to MENA rules that let's say Morocco becomes part of the Open Sky Agreement or similar, right? So this is the idea behind it. I could, of course, talk more about it. I have termed it a normative empire in the sense that the European Union does export, there is a normative aspect to that, but it's not the big norms, democracy, human rights as the normative power Europe concept of EU-MENA stipulated. It's much more about rules and regulations and practices. It can be best practices in the financial sector. It can be rules and practices, how you do things. You do things the European way if you want to be part of that order. And normative also in the sense that the European Union maintains a very normative discourse. So the discourse is always there of saying, we want to export democracy, good governance, the rule of law, human rights, and so on and so forth, which is a bit, reminiscent of the civilizing missions of past empires. And so that is basically the approach. Why is it useful? It is useful, I think, because it allows us to look, first of all, to consider that there is a big power asymmetry, which very often is ignored in the literature. It allows us to think about the fact that the European Union, or European Union and its member states, do have very concrete interests, which may be surprising, but that is another aspect that has been very often ignored in the literature. What are the interests of the European Union vis-à-vis its neighborhoods or its peripheries? Well, again, the same interests that empires always had vis-à-vis their peripheries. It's about stability, it's about security, it's about economic interests, right? And in the case, perhaps, of the North Africa and the Middle East, it's also energy security. And that is, again, that fits into the conceptualization. As I said before, it's a way of looking at the relations. It also allows to look at the contestation practices, because these neighborhoods, they become much more hybrid, right? They're not Europe, but they're also not Europe. So they're partly, and it's differentiated. It depends from country to country, but something is happening in that area by which many rules are accepted, many European rules are accepted. The elites of these peripheries are also very much tied to the European order. And it allows to look at contestation practices as well. So I think I stop here. I could talk for much more about that, but I think that this is basically the idea behind it. It doesn't mean that the European Union is doing evil things. That's not what it means, right? But I think it's a much more realistic way to look at the relationship between Europe and its peripheries.
Professor, I'm sorry to jump in, but I was just wondering whether I can come in because I need to leave in 10 minutes or so. So just to consider that. I can speak now or after, but I think at, let's say, 1 to 2, I will need to leave. Thanks.
Okay, okay, please, Simone, and then Ambassador Gentilini.
Okay. No, I think, I just wanted to follow up what Raffaella said in the sense that this is really trying to conceive of what is the European model or idea behind its approach to labeling a region, the Southern Neighbourhood, and codifying its policies in a certain ways. And we can go back and as I said, Raffaella has worked on this notion of a normative empire. Others have used other suffixes, prefixes, but we have also EU Commission President Barroso, who in 2007 himself said perhaps the EU is the first non-imperial empire. So this is a discourse that also comes from within. And I associate it also with making sense of its own being in the world, right? It is deeply attached to its civilian power. And with that comes a certain higher ground. And this is very visible, I think, in the relationship with the MENA with the MENA region. And now it's interesting that you say that you know, this is changing from a matrix kind of format to a more tailor-made approach, or to looking at partners. But I think we have seen it kind of over and over again, and I would certainly welcome that shift. But I think we have seen it over and over again, even in areas such as energy, which is already, you know, not a fully European competence area, or it is at least a questionable European competence area with various practices within Europe. But in looking at Euro-Mediterranean energy dialogues and interaction and integration formats, we see the same language of European rules promoted, and there is not that much flexibility in that. So I think, again, I think the practitioners yourselves, you feel, especially those working in, you know, directly, feels to some extent, at least that's my own impression with talking to the real practitioners, but a certain frustration with this, right? Because there is something about the ontological security of the European Union that is attached to these norms, values, etc. But when you work with partners in practice, you know that those discourses are really hampering, probably more than anything, you know, fruitful cooperation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Simone. And yes, it would be also interesting to know what the European Union could do to address this you know, these practices of contestation, and also to you know, to face the growing influence of external actors. Raffaella mentioned, of course, China, Russia, and so on. You know, as you know, there is, so in order to face this competition of soft powers in the region, right? So this would be interesting from the EU's point of view to discuss this point. Please, Ambassador.
Thanks. No, thanks a lot. Well, I know what you mean when you say empire. I think I know that. And again, to you know, to avoid any misunderstanding, I would love somehow, in a way, in this non-imperial way that you were referring when mentioning Barroso, I would love that the EU, also when it comes to foreign policy, starts talking the language of power. Because I think I see that. By the way, it's not that this normative this approach is coming out now. It's an approach which has its roots in at least you know, 20 years of literature. But I think at least this is what I believe my approach is. That is also always good to start from what's happening on the ground in terms of real interaction between the EU and the countries, because there are very many layers, as you know. And there is the governmental layers, but there are other layers as well, with all the difficulties that this bring because of the various situation in each of the specific country. But I just want to say that on this issue of not applying the matrix, but to go country by country, this is already happening, actually. And if you look at what we do with each of these individual countries, you will see that is not a copy-paste approach. Then I wanted to mention this issue of resisting or not resisting to the EU. Again, it's not black and white, and I think it has to be seen. But let me say, let's think about green, for instance, or digital. Obviously, obviously, there will be resistance. It's clear. If you look at the socio-economic structure of the countries we are talking about, it's not, let's say, it would be much more difficult that within Europe to undertake certain transitions, which are the transitions which need to be undertaken. Economic, digital, ecological, I think are the transitions ahead. And of course, I expect resistance. I expect resistance because this is going to change dramatically the markets, the social welfare system, like in Europe as well. But so just to say that also this issue of resistance, yes or no, again, it has to be, it cannot be yes and no, it cannot be black and white. It has to be seen in the different areas. As I said, I would like the EU to talk the language of power when it comes to foreign policy as well. That's what we are saying. We are saying this actually. But that would require some transformational things to happen also within the EU. In the region, of course, it's more and more competition, also with other powers. Of course, it's competition with Russia, with China, with Turkey. But again, if you go specific, country by country, you would see that we have a different way of engaging than those other countries. And this plays well in certain situations and does not play well in other situations. Because simply to address certain situations, we are not a power with those kind of tools. If you look at Libya, for instance, and if you look at the situation in Libya, and if you look who is there practically on the ground, you would see. But the Libyans want to work with us. They don't want to work with Russia. They don't want to work with Turkey. If we are going ahead with the process based on ownership in Libya, obviously the EU is going to be the partner. So what I'm trying to say on your question is that we have to compete, of course, but we have to compete on our own basis and with our own means, because we are good at doing certain things and we are not good at doing other things. And this, of course, is the basis of the political choice that we have to make. In any case, it's a very interesting discussion, and I'm very grateful for this invitation. I do believe that between let's say universities, the academic world, and the world of the institutions and those who engage on the ground practically in concrete, there is a need for more mutual knowledge, first of all, and then possibly interaction. And I say this with all, actually, you know, I believe very much in this way of combining the two approaches, which I think it's also very good for the students, very good for the youth, first of all. Many thanks. It was a pleasure to be here. And if you do come to Brussels, come to visit us whenever would be possible again. We are starting to go back to some kind of normality slowly here in Belgium. It's also very difficult to think when it will be normal again, if ever. will be normal again. It will be normal in a different way, as we all say. But do come and do bring also your students. I think it's good to see the EU and to see how the EU works. It's very difficult to understand how the EU works. It's our weakest point. We are too difficult, too sophisticated, and too difficult to read, even for those who knows a lot of things. But somehow this is the beauty of the European Union, to be sophisticated. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gentilini.
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador.
Okay, I hope to see you in the near future somewhere in Brussels or thank you very much again. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Rosita, if you want to jump, if you'd like to jump in and to...
Yeah. I have lots of
some remarks. Yeah.
thoughts, because I had the chance to review this book for the first time when it was in process of the publication. So I had the chance to read it before it was published, and I found it extremely interesting from many perspective and point of view. Of course, maybe we shocked Ambassador Gentilini a little bit with our discussions, but I think I think it's useful, because maybe, what I was saying and wondering when I listened Raffaella and Simone and Ambassador was that maybe really there is a gap between what is written and produced and what is implemented on the ground, according which rules and according which norms, if you want. And in my view, the book is really an important book, because it somehow reflects what a lot of scholars were thinking about, but were never able to put on a book, because the debate is very long. Many scholars reflect about this asymmetry of power, the borderlands, Europe as an empire. But in my view, the idea to put at the heart of the discussion the practices of resistance is original, completely original, because as Raffaella and Simone said before, of course, these practices of contestation are at the level of the agreements, because of course the negotiation with the European Union is a negotiation on the basis of the agreements, and of course at the level of elite. So this is of course the case. So maybe Ambassador Gentilini did not very well understand this point. It's not a contestation such as a revolt, a revolution. It's a contestation in the same frame in which the European Union works. So it's the same level that he was talking about. So in my view, this is the originality. So how the MENA region, that for many years is being conceived in the frame of the Euro-Mediterranean relation as the, as the less powerful actor in this asymmetrical relationship, can achieve some results in contrasting this normative power. This is the originality of the book. And this approach says us a lot about what? About to contrast this idea that MENA people were and is unable to reach their own goal, their own interest. And in my view, this is the originality that contrasts somehow to this old idea of Arab mind. So this inability to react, inability to act, inability to propose and to put on the table their own needs and so on. So this is, in my view, what the book wants to say. I don't want to interpret your ideas, but this is the original point of view, that of course, deal with this asymmetrical relationship. We cannot say nothing than this. The relationship are at the level of asymmetry. There is a difference on the leverage power that the European Union can put on the table, and what the elites, even if they are elites in the MENA region, can do, how they can react. So maybe if you can elaborate a little bit more about this kind of practices of resistance, if there is a common ground, a common path, if you, in the book, according to the various chapters, you have seen some common path of resistance, practices of resistance, or as the Ambassador Gentilini outlined, each country on a different dossier elaborated some different practices of contestation. So yeah, I know that there are many, of course, because I read the book, but maybe if you can elaborate a little bit more for the students about how these practices of resistance configurate and are elaborated in the different countries and case studies, and according to the different dossier they have to deal with. And thank you very much, because I think this is a very, very welcome book, and theoretical and methodological elaboration. So I'm sorry that Ambassador was a little bit frustrated also, maybe.
Yes, and the book, sorry, Rosita, but the book is not a black or white exercise, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, so of course, this is, so we have listened to the official rhetoric of the European Union, that is, the EU the EU proposes but doesn't impose. Yes, of course, but international relations are based on asymmetries. So of course you cannot. So you have to recognize these facts.
Yeah.
And yes, and now, but I would like that you look to the future, because this seminar series is titled EU Next Talks. So, what are the lessons learned from your book in order to change the foreign policy of the European Union towards the MENA region? Raffaella or Simone, as you like.
You want to go first, Simone?
I can. Yes. Now, I mean, in terms of Rosita's question about, can we see what if there are any patterns? Now, Raffaella did elaborate a little bit on the fact that what we identified as thick and thin forms of contestation practices, we rather see the thin version. And I think, even if I alluded to, a question mark whether we will see increasingly thicker forms of resistance, in the sense that as Europe, or as the EU specifically, is trying to launch itself as a geopolitical actor, as it's in pragmatic, what is it called, principled pragmatism, as migration and counterterrorism and so on has really taken over a lot of the kind of the show. Perhaps we will see also, and given that there is a new geopolitical environment with other actors, maybe we'll see thicker forms of contestation. But I guess what we found in the book, which I also, until I see perhaps something else, I would kind of assume, is that given that this is really a hub and spoke approach, right? So so from the EMP in '95 to the kind of slow continuity of the Union for the Mediterranean, there is a regional dimension that is kind of very much on the back burner in general. There is bilateral approach. So each country for its own, in its dealing with this massive and, as the ambassador said, highly complex and sophisticated is maybe not the word, but intricate, nearly Byzantine ways of doing. This is an asymmetry that we have, and this is something which we see, in international diplomacy in general, dealing with, let's say, the global South in general, the fact that you need ever more advanced diplomatic strategies to deal with and let your voice be heard and, argue your case and advance your interests in this world. So I do think that the EU's approach, which is one of dealing with individual states in the MENA region, and having very kind of, I will call value-based, approach, which has to do with the economic model promoted, etc. This is something which is quite sticky, I think. I think this is going to stick. I think that the forms of contestation or opposition or resistance to this will be kind of still cast as small states trying to oppose a much kind of, stronger, powerful European partner. So this is not easy. I have problems with the partner term and the partnership vocabulary. I think it conceals a lot of these inequalities that exist, and it doesn't, it's not convincing in any way. So I realized that there is a strategic discursive shift, because, as I said, I think a lot of the practitioners working on this find that the big norm kind of discourse are preventing them perhaps from doing business in the way that they need to, and they do. So maybe, but still, this doesn't really reflect the reality. So yeah, so what's going to happen? Well, that will be my future scenario. I think I'm not really in the business of projecting or giving any foreign policy advice to anyone, but to me it seems like if with true intentions, I think there needs to be a focus on regional integration. And I don't know if the Union for the Mediterranean is the right place for that. I really don't know. But I think, there is, and this can be done with looking at energy transformations, for example. But, because if we're talking about a turn to solar power in the Maghreb, for example, there's huge potential for interconnectedness along such, dimensions. But then the European Union cannot come and insist on a European energy market model, which cuts subsidies, which unbundles, energy supply chains and so on, because this doesn't work in that context. So I would make a big argument for much more heavy-handed regional integration, and this needs to come before, ideally, individual states negotiate with the EU. Thanks.
Thank you, Simone. Raffaella.
Yeah. Thank you, Rosita, for your very positive feedback on the book, of course. One of our authors recently asked us whether we wanted to do a second volume, right? Because things are obviously changing and have changed, so that could be a thought. Now we're just going to go back to the question, what could change or what should change? I mean, what should change is always different from what will change, right? So I think the starting point is really to acknowledge what has been going on. And I think what I found very interesting in Ambassador Gentilini's remarks is that he was saying, well, we're doing what we cannot impose anything. we have to respect what our partner countries want. This is all good and well, right? I mean, he also mentioned the humanitarian assistance given to the Palestinians or to refugees, and so or to host countries rather than to refugees, to hosting countries. Again, this is true, or macroeconomic stabilization in the case of Tunisia. Again, all well and true. But I think we have to look also at the broader picture and really ask ourselves, how much has the European Union or Europe contributed to some of the challenges that North Africa and the Middle East are facing? Again, if we look at the new document, the February document, the new agenda, or the renewed partnership document, it starts, I mean, there is a section where it says the document identifies different challenges in the Mediterranean Middle East, rising inequalities and environmental degradation. So there's a long list. And then it says that basically these are partly global trends. Okay, but I still think that we have to ask ourselves, how much has the European Union contributed to at least some of this development? I'm not saying causing, because MENA elites and MENA governments do have agency and do have responsibilities as well, but I say contributed. And here I would like to talk about, or I think we need to think about the neoliberal development model that has been exported. Again, not only the European Union has done that, other players and international financial institutions have done that. So how much has the specific way of exporting a certain development model in the absence of democratic development or political reforms, how much has this contributed to rising inequalities, the strengthening of authoritarianism, crony capitalism, corruption, and so on and so forth? I think these questions have to be asked. And the same goes for the scandalous European policy on migration control, which is more an issue of the member states, but still it happens within a European framework, right? How much have these policies contributed to the strengthening of authoritarian regimes? Because if you allow them to violate human rights, because it's good for Europeans not to get refugees they don't want or migrants they don't want, when there is a problem, right? If you provide specific authoritarian regimes or even militias with surveillance equipment and border control equipment, well, there may be a problem, right? So I think that this is the starting point. And from there you can start thinking about what should change. No? And I may sound like a hopeless idealist, but I think instead of saying I wish Europe could speak the voice of power, I think Europe should again go back and speak the language of human rights, and consistently so, and put that back on the agenda, and not just say when it suits us we talk about human rights, but we talk about rights, we talk about civil rights, we talk about human rights, and business interests, economic interests, as important as they are, may in some cases have to take second place. That would be my wishful thinking, which again, looking at the problems that the European Union is facing at the moment, both internally and externally, I don't think it's likely to happen. There is a lack of a vision, and so I expect more of the same, and I see this renewed partnership document is, in my view, more of the same. That's it.
Yeah, I agree, unfortunately, with you. Yeah.
Okay.
So if the students, they have some questions, just to close with some remarks by the students, it will be interesting and useful if you here in the room or at home, because mainly this seminar was organized for you. So yeah, so it was a pleasure, of course, to see Raffaella and Simone and to discuss all together, but of course it was an occasion to talk about some topics. And to make some reflections. But of course, we are not, we don't impose nothing to nobody. So if you have some question more, otherwise we can maybe we can close the discussion. What do you think, Giovanni?
No, I think that okay, if students don't have any other questions, so we have so there are 2 minutes left, only 2 minutes left. So I think that we can close here. And so I would like to thank Simone and Raffaella for accepting our invitation, and students for joining us. I know that this is the last class of Rosita's course. Yes, so, and good luck to them for their exams and so on. So thank you very much again, and take care.
Yeah, and we hope to have you in presence very soon.
Yeah.
Raffaella and Simone here in blood and flesh and blood, really, because otherwise to just see you through WebEx or Zoom or other platform is very sad. So thank you very much, really, for the book, for the presence, and yeah, good luck, and I wish you all the best. And thank you, Giovanni, for co-organizing, but really organizing this very interesting talk and conference. So thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you
so much
for inviting us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.